Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AAFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. I just want to make this observation, and then we're going to take some phone calls, and I got a little content I want to deliver on this topic. But it was striking to me looking at the results of the election on Tuesday night, Ken Cuccinelli in Virginia. I'm just going to focus on one takeaway from that. So there's a lot of takeaways from that. The GOP establishment abandoned him. They didn't put any money into the race. Even the Democrats are saying, look, if this election had been held a week later, he probably would have lost. I mean, the air was draining out of McAuliffe's balloon virtually by the day. This was a winnable campaign. But the Republican establishment, because Cuccinelli is a social conservative, they didn't lift a finger to help this guy. They wanted him to fail. They did not want the Tea Party to gain a victory in this. They didn't want a Tea Party victory. They were willing to sacrifice the governorship of Virginia in order not to give a victory to the Tea Party. That is how the ruling class Republicans actually sabotage their own platform and their own political principles. Now, the thing that struck me in looking at the exit polling from Tuesday night is that Ken Cuccinelli won among married women. He won 51 to 42 among women who are married. Among single women, he lost 67 to 25, got obliterated by single women. So what you realize from that, if he wins decisively among married women, but loses catastrophically to the Democratic opponent among single women, if you are a Democrat strategist, what is your takeaway? Your takeaway is we want as few women to get married as we possibly can. When women get married, we lose their vote. When women get married, they start voting for conservative candidates. So we've got to keep them from getting married. I've got a story in the stack today about the fact that there is a marriage penalty in Obamacare. I'll see if I can find this story because it's a pretty dramatic story, actually, where, and we've talked about it before, but it's come to the surface again, where there is a huge financial incentive for couples that are dating not to get married, and an incentive, if they are married, to get divorced, because there is a penalty in Obamacare if you're married. Because if you're married, you declare your income jointly. You put your two incomes together, you declare it together, and then that income figure then becomes the basis on which your subsidy is determined. You with me on that? Now, if you are single, if you're not married, then you file singly. You file your own tax return. You don't file a joint. Your income is going to be lower because obviously if two of you are working and you pool your income, it's going to be higher. And that combination, the joint income of the two of you together, may be enough to put you over the threshold where now you do not qualify for any subsidies. So there's an actual incentive in Obamacare to get divorced. So instead of incentivizing marriage, instead of affirming marriages, instead of strengthening marriages, instead of building marriages, instead of protecting marriages, this thing actually incentivizes divorce. It provides a financial incentive for these miniature little civilizations to be collapsed and to be destroyed from within. So it's perverse. And the penalty is anywhere from $5,000 to $11,000. That's what it costs you to get married. And it's not a theoretical issue any longer. CBS Local in New York's got a big story today about a couple that is seriously considering divorce because it's too expensive to stay married. They can't get insurance that they can afford if they stay married. So it's not a hypothetical anymore. It's not a theoretical thing. They are looking at getting divorced. So when you want to have public policy that should incentivize marriage, it should support marriage, it should strengthen marriage, it should affirm marriage, it should not penalize marriage. So instead, we've got a policy that weakens the family, it weakens marriage, it weakens the institution of marriage, and that therefore weakens the cultural fabric. and it actually perversely, on the other hand, incentivizes divorce. We got enough problems keeping intact marriages together without giving a reward to people who break up their intact families. So there's a long way now from a theoretical issue. But to get back to my original point, then we'll go to the phones. Get back to my original point. The Democrats have a political incentive to keep women from getting married. They have a political incentive, if they are married, to break up those marriages. That is good for them. Broken marriages are good for Democrats. It's in their political interest to see marriages break up. Why? Because then those women in those marriages, they become wards of the state. They become dependent upon the state. They become dependent upon government services. They become dependent upon government welfare. They become dependent on government housing. They become dependent on the government for virtually everything, for feeding their children. So they become wards of the state. And who is that good for? That is good for Democrats. It's good for liberals because they want bigger government. They want more and more people dependent upon them. But listen, what they always accuse conservatives of is that we want to keep our women barefoot and pregnant. Well, who is it? Who is it really that has the incentive and is actually adopting policies? I'm not going to say it's absolutely intentional on their part, but you'd have to be blind not to see the connection between their policies and the results. So it could be intentional on their part. They're the ones that have the political incentive to keep women single, barefoot, and pregnant. Keep them single, keep them poor, and keep them pregnant. Keep them having children. Promise them, hey, if you want to raise your income, just have another baby, but don't marry the father. If you marry the father, you lose your welfare. You lose your subsidy. So have more babies because you can get more income. And you can look at the tables. I've looked at them. It's right there on federal websites. You can find out exactly. A single mom can find out exactly to the dollar how much she can increase her income by having another baby without marrying the father. You can compute it. And so the incentive now, liberals are the ones that are offering the incentives to keep women single, barefoot, and pregnant. All right, well, let's go to the phones. Let's go to Charles, Memphis, Tennessee. Charles, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hello, Brian. First of all, what you just said is scary. That's a scary thought. But I've always felt like the liberals, the social programs of liberals are generally tending toward keeping people in a state of dependency and suppressing initiative. And I think that's certainly true.
Yeah, and let me just add one more thought. If a woman gets married, you can see now she is looking to her husband to be her provider. She's looking to her husband to be her protector. She's looking to her husband to provide a sheltered and stable and protected environment for her children. She doesn't need government now. She's got a husband who has pledged himself before God and guests to take care of her. So if she's got a husband in her life and they are married, they're happily married, what do they need government for? They don't need government. They're taking care of themselves. They're accepting the responsibility to provide for their kids. That does no good for the liberals. That's of no use to them because here's a couple and their children that do not need government services. So they've actually got this perverse incentive to actually keep people from getting married and to see intact marriages fall apart. Anyway, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Scary. Yeah, well, listen, I'm quite different from most of your listeners. I'm Jewish, living here in Memphis, and I'm also a veteran. And, an earlier call talked about this act that you've been talking about, this transgender thing that's going to happen. And, how he didn't go to war, to protect those people or something to that effect. You remember what he said.
Well, yeah, he was talking about the kind of country that he was, he loved this country enough to be willing to die for the liberty and the freedoms we have here.
Right. Well, see, I was wounded in Vietnam in the mid-'60s, and I served in the military exactly to protect Americans, whoever they were. I didn't ask about transgender, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Jewish. I'm an American citizen, and I went to war for everyone,
right?
And not excluding people like this other fellow did. And I just felt like that was a little bit offensive to me.
Well, Charles, let me just kind of follow up with a question here with you. You want liberties and constitutional rights for all Americans, right?
I do.
And you were willing. You actually were injured in the service of your country because you were fighting to protect liberty and constitutional rights for all Americans, regardless of their sexual orientation.
That's
okay.
True.
Now, would you agree?
By the way, it wasn't such a big issue in the 60s.
Right, I understand that.
It was a non-issue.
Yeah, but would you agree that one of those precious constitutional rights is the free exercise of religion?
Absolutely, 100%.
Would you agree that another one of those precious constitutional rights that you were willing to bleed and die for is freedom of speech?
Absolutely. 100%.
Would you agree that one of the rights that you were willing to risk your life to protect was the freedom of the press? That is, the freedom to publish your ideas and your thoughts.
Again, absolutely. That's one of the reasons I listen to you guys.
And would you agree that one of the rights that you were willing to die for was to protect the right of the American people to assemble peaceably if they intend no harm against anyone, that they should be able to peaceably assemble whenever they want?
Absolutely.
And then what about the freedom to petition the government? What about the freedom to petition the government for the redress of grievances? Was that another one of the rights you were willing to die for?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so here's my follow-up question. Now, Charles, INDA, this Employment Non-Discrimination Act, it would take away every single one of those constitutional rights for Christian businessmen and for conservative Jewish businessmen. They would be punished. They would be taken to court. They would be sued. Their businesses could be destroyed if they ran their businesses according to the exercise of their most deeply held religious principles. Do you think that there's anything remotely American or right about that?
The point is, that I was making is I don't agree that business owners should have that right stripped away from them. However, I was willing to die for the transgender person as much as I was for you.
Yeah, but I understand. But if you give rights to one group of people based on aberrant sexual behavior and that destroys constitutional rights for people who engage in normal sexual behavior, what is possibly remotely right about that? Focal Point AFR Talk.